Hello everyone. This video is going to focus on functions. They are very important aspect of programming, but functions in Python also has a little bit of differences that we will get to as we go through this video. So let's get to it. So functions in Python, like any other language, is basically for repeating the same code over and over again. And instead of having to type the code, you will just type it one time, create this entity, this concept, this piece of code that you can call again and again. So for example, in a very simple function, I can create a function, say hello to world, and every time I call this function, this line of code print hello to world will be created. So I create this function, and once you create a function, nothing is going to happen because you basically created this concept of function. Now, if I call the function, now is when the piece of code under the function is going to be run. So that's very simple understanding of functions. So next thing is if the function has an input. If your function has an input, simply you can put the input in the parentheses, and I have called it the name input. So if I want to create a function, say hello to whoever, I can create this function and say hello to Jeremiah, and it says hello Jeremiah. So it doesn't matter what you put here. You could put here x, as long as there is consistency between x, the function is still going to work. So you just need the same variables in here. So the naming does not matter if the variables are consistent. I can also say hello to Jack, and it's going to say hello Jack. And if my function has an output, for example, in this example, I have a remainder. I have the dividend and the divisor, and I want to calculate the remainder of this division. And I do the calculation, and the remainder in Python is percentage sign, and I do the calculation, and then I return the remainder. So what's going to happen if I run this? And nothing's going to happen. The only thing that's going to happen is actually the concept of this entity of this function is going to be recognized and defined by Python. So once I run this, now there is a new function defined in the Python language or Python space that I can call it. Once I call remainder 10 and 3, now we get number 1. So if I change this to 11, now we get 2, and if I change this to 12, it will be 3. So it's working properly. I could also, this is another example, but I could also get inputs in forms of array and also returns in forms of array. So for example, here I'm getting an array of numbers, and I am checking if each number is even or odd. So I go through a loop for all of those elements, and then if the remainder of that element or that number is 0, it's even. If it's not, it's odd. So let's say I have forgotten to define this function. If I run this, I will get an error. It says I don't know odd or even. It's not defined. But if I go ahead and define it for Python, now once I run it, now I get the value that I want. So it's odd or even. And if I also want to return more than one value, I could simply say, return parentheses and separate them by comma. So it's a simple division function that I've created here. If I want the quotient and also the remainder in this division, I have calculated it by changing division by the integer. That gives me the quotient. and then also the remainder. So now I can return the quotient and remainder as two outputs of this function. So basically I will get 7 and 2 when I do this example. When you have multiple outputs in Python, you can also capture them with a variable. So now answer is whatever this function outputs. And if I print answer in a different way, if I print answer, it will give me both of the values in form of a list. And if I want each line, the first output or the second output, I could call them by index 0 and then 1 and so on and so forth. I could also explicitly say I want the output, the first one go to Q or quotient, and the second output goes to R or remainders, and that will also work. So this is another way of getting something out of the function. A very important aspect of functions in Python is mapping a function. This is something that we are going to be using a lot in this course. So I cannot stress this enough that you want to pay attention, that you understand how to map a function, because when we start learning about different modules, we will see that mapping a function is going to be a critical skill that you need to have. So pay attention here. So basically, mapping a function is when you want a function to be run for each and every element of a collection. So the collections that we have already seen in this course is a list. So for example, let's say we create this function, square. So basically, whatever the input is, we wanna multiply it by itself. So the function is square, and we want to map this function to each and every one of the elements of a list. So this is my list. I create my list, and then I say map the function to my list. And once I run this, now I have created a map. So it's a little bit, not the way what we would expect to see the result, but the way Python works, for you to see the result, you have to either use the function next, like here. So if I do the function next, now I see the result of this is square of 1, square of 2, square of 3, square of 4, and so on and so forth. I could also do the same thing by saying list, and instead of having to do next function, this list will do all of the possible values for me. So this is what we most of the time we want. We map the function to the collection, and then we say listed. It means that do the function for each and every one of the elements. So here our function, our list doesn't have a lot of elements, but let's create a bigger function. So once you have much more numbers than in a real world data set, now you can see what is the value of mapping a function. And simply by just creating a function and mapping it, you were able to do the same function for all of those arrays. Normally, what you would have done, probably you would have written a for loop, and that for loop would do this run for you. And there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, your code is not going to be as readable. Second, when you are creating a loop, you sort of open yourself up to creating inefficient coding. And since you're not a very experienced programmer, and you will never be an experienced programmer because it's not what you're supposed to be, you're an industrial engineer, so it's better to start using mapping a function instead of writing your own loops to do what you need to do. And also, thirdly, once we start learning different modules in this course, we will see how mapping a function is going to sort of come handier when we are learning to use those modules instead of having to program things ourselves. And the last way we could do this, we could do next, but at any point that we are done, by our next, we can say list. At that point, wherever we are, Python will take it from there. So it's already applied the square function to 1 and 2, and now it once after that it remains these numbers. So let's look at them. Remains 3, 4, 43. So whatever remains that we haven't already called, once you say list, it will start mapping those to, and it will create that list. So the challenge that I have here is I want you all to do 1 or 2 and 3 on your own one time and try to answer this question. How does next and less work? What is the differences between them? If you had difficulty figuring this out, I already did answer this question, this challenge, when I was explaining the mapping a function. So rewind the video and look at it to see how next and list are different.